Hello, everyone. Thank you for welcoming me and into your group. I'm David Beckham, obviously not the footballer, because I've strung at least one sentence together reasonably coherently so far, so that's good. I'm principal consultant in Judo Consulting, which sounds very important, but it's basically me on my own, so I made myself the boss. And I'm going to talk about the obviously linked topics of business analysis and samurai philosophy, because they're so obviously linked to everybody that why wouldn't I want to talk about that? So no further ado, let's get into it. And as usual, I'm not on the right active screen. So introduction. I always like to start with a little bit of a quote. It is imperative to master the principles of the art of war and learn to be unmoved even in the heat of battle. That wasn't written by somebody who's just run a very difficult requirements workshop. That was written by a chap called Miyamoto Musashi in mid-1600 Japan. And we're going to be hearing quite a lot more about him and another particular samurai as we go through this talk. And I'm going to explain my philosophy of business analysis and how it's come about and how it's been influenced by a completely unusual and unrelated topic that is samurai Japan. And I think it will hopefully illustrate with a bit of imagination, you can learn something from anything. So a little bit about me. Oh no, sorry, a little bit about the middle way. How amateurish. Yeah, it's a personal frame of reference. I mean, it's based on my experience of being a BA for quite a long time and doing lots and lots and lots of projects, and also lots of reading around the subject that I've done. So it might not work for everybody, but hopefully it'll give you a little bit of insight into how things work. It uses historical combat principles to facilitate positive business outcomes. And by that, I don't mean you get a sword out and you attack your stakeholders with a wooden sword or something like that. It's more about the mindset and philosophy of getting to an outcome. I'm not going to be talking about specific techniques today. It is really about a mindset, as you'll see as we go through. And it's about being balanced and having equilibrium and working at the center of things. That's essentially what the middle way is. And the Japanese term for middle way is Judo, the middle way. And that's why I chose it for my company name as well, because it sort of reflects where I am and who I am. And on that subject, a little bit more about me, yawn. I've been a business analyst for thousands of years, it feels like sometimes. I previously worked at Aviva in its various guises for 33 years before leaving to set up my own consultancy company. I've done lots of projects and lots of methods, as you can see there, some which are more common than others. Waterfall, agile, watergile, which is that one where we all try and do agile but in a waterfall project manner, which most companies try and do at some point, and acceleragile thinking. I actually made that one up. That doesn't exist, but I have worked with a number of different methods and a number of different methodologies. And as I say, I left Aviva in 2019 to set up Judo Consulting Limited. So, origins of the middle way. Where did I get this idea about the middle way? My brain works in various different ways. Actually, let's just recap there, because I think I missed a bit, didn't I? Yeah, my hobbies. Yeah, my hobbies do include reading a lot. I do read a lot. I draw quite a lot, and I sit around thinking quite a lot. This is the benefits of setting up your own business. You can sit around and think quite a lot, and I do a lot of motivational speaking, mostly centered around one of my other unusual hobbies, which is cohabiting with Parkinson's disease. It's worth mentioning that if I get a bit shaky, my mouse control might go all over the place and we'll be going up and down slides before we know it. But sometimes I can be a bit shaky, sometimes my voice can go a bit quiet, but we'll see how we get on during the course of the presentation. I'm all right at the moment, but you never know what the medication will do. So yeah, origins in the middle of the way. As I was saying, my brain works in a slightly different way, not just due to the Parkinson's, but because of just the way my brain works. I guess my interest in samurai Japan started when I was a little wee nipper and I watched a series called Monkey. People of a certain age may well remember Monkey. It wasn't set in Japan, it was actually set in China. But the spirit of Monkey was irrepressible, and that made me run around the garden with a a washing or a laundry pole, pretending I was monkey and beating up various different enemies with this large stick, normally to the detriment of myself, because I'd almost invariably clout myself over the head with it at some point during the course of the day. When I got a bit older, I got interested in history, and one particular excursion with my family, we went to a place called Snows Hill Manor, which is owned by the National Trust. And as you can see there, it's a very eccentric collection of objects. But one room was devoted entirely to Japanese samurai suits of armor, and they all was sort of made as if people were in them. And as a small child looking through this door, this room with these rather splendid suits of armor sort of sat there, had quite a formative effect on me, and it just stuck in my mind. And I think I was then, from that point on, hooked on samurai Japan. From there, I got interested in the art of the samurai sword. But in Norfolk, there weren't that many kendo skills, it has to be said. There weren't that many people practicing the art of the fast draw with the Japanese sword. So eventually I got into fencing, and I became a fencer, and I became a fencing instructor for a number of years, until my Parkinson's meant I was getting more dangerous than I should be as a fencer. But these are two of my students, Ross Ingleson on the right-hand side and Anna Bentley on the left. And Anna went on to fence for the ladies Olympic team in 2012. I would hesitate to claim any influence on that, because she worked incredibly hard. After she left me, I coached her up until about the age of 16. But you know, if you start somebody off with an interest in something, it can be sometimes quite surprising where they end up. And I found during my course, my tenure as a fencing coach, my interest in samurai Japan also influenced that, because the similarities between what was essentially the only European martial art that involved swords and some of the samurai philosophy was quite interchangeable. So when I became a business analyst, I was already open to the ideas of cross-fertilization between these disciplines. So just to understand the middle way, it's worth thinking about the difference between a way and a method. A way is a manner of doing something, a mode or a style, a road, track or path. A method tends to be something that's point specific. You use a method to do a particular task, a one-off task. So for instance, you might use Agile as a way of delivering a project, and a method you would use within it would be user stories. Or you might do process models as a method to deliver a waterfall type project. So there's very much a difference between way and method. And I think as a BA, you have to kind of almost invent your own way and find your own way of doing things. And you can then bring various methods into it. I always liken it to being Formula One in terms of a sporting analogy. The method is the car. You get to the finish line by the method of driving a car, but the BA or the driver is actually the way. So the driver influences the method to get to the right outcome. And I think it's always worth trying to bear in mind, what am I doing here? Am I doing a particular technique, or am I moving towards an objective along the way? I think that's a useful way of categorizing things. So now, just to introduce you to a couple of our protagonists, who we're going to be looking at in a little bit more detail. Miyamoto Musashi was the most successful duelist in samurai history. He fought a couple of hundred duels during his lifetime, and he didn't die as a result of them. He actually died as a result of an illness. He founded the Naiten Ichi Ryu, which is the two swords, one heaven style, which was very innovative for its time. Traditionally, samurai warriors used the long sword, the katana, and they tended to wield that two-handed. Musashi, who was always innovating, always changing the rules, tended to use his short sword in his left hand and his long sword in his right hand, which was an unusual challenge and gave him an advantage. And he was an author of a book called The Book of Five Rings, which is essentially his philosophy of samurai fencing. And you can see that on the bookshelf thusly. It's still available on Amazon. I personally find it a very good read. I've always been able to relate it not just to sword fighting, but to life in general, as we'll see when we go further into the presentation. So Musashi is probably the most influential role model for me in the samurai world. The second chap I'm going to be quoting from is a gentleman called Yagyu Munenori. He was the personal sword teacher of one of the Tokugawa shoguns, so he certainly knew what he was doing. He founded the rather splendidly named Shinkage Ryu, which is the Shadow Spirit School, which is kind of quite a funky title, really. Unfortunately, his funkiness didn't extend to his book naming. He wrote a book called The Book of Household Wisdom, which sounds a bit like Mrs. Beaton's cookbook, but you can also see that on the bookshelf behind me. I'm kind of doing that Zoom thing that they do on TV, you know, BBC interviews. They've got their books out on the bookshelf. But just to show you that these guys had a lasting legacy, their books are still quite widely read today, and not just by martial artists, particularly the Book of Five Rings. It's well known as a good book on strategy and business strategy as well. And I'll illustrate some of that now with some examples of some of the wisdom that came out of those two books. Musashi has a phrase called mountain and sea changing. And essentially with this one, he's talking about when you try something on an opponent, if it doesn't work the first time, you're not going to get any benefit out of doing it again. And this sort of illustrates really how pragmatic some of this advice can be from these people. You know, I mean, that can apply to any situation, but also applies to work as a BA. You know, if you're in a workshop and people are not getting process modeling, you probably won't want to keep trying to bang on about process modeling. You may want to try something else like a user story or something like that. Changing your tactics abruptly and doing something different can also provide a break in a workshop. It might be that you've just spent, let's say you've just spent 4 hours doing a document review. Splendid stuff, particularly if you've been doing it on Zoom. So everybody's sitting there, they've got their eyes red, they feel like they've been in a sand blaster. So you might want to do something different. You might either want to call a break, which isn't that different, or you might want to do some brainstorming about something or talk about something completely different, talk about the weather, talk about some sport or something like that. Changing your tactics, changing your rhythm abruptly gives people a mental break, but it can also help you get through a particular stuck period as well. But if basically, you know, if it isn't working, fix it. I think it's quite an obvious maxim, but quite appropriate for the business analyst. The next one's a bit more esoteric, Enzan Ometsuki, which is viewing the distant mountain. This is an expression that Munenori came up with, actually. And it describes the way you look at an opponent when you're fighting them. When I was a fencing instructor, I always taught my pupils to look just slightly beyond their opponent, because if you fixed on one aspect of the opponent, you could get fooled. If you looked at their hand, the hand could fool you. The hand could be setting a trap. They might indicate they were going to attack in that direction, and then they come back and attack in another direction. If you look at the head, again, the head can be used to feint with. It can be used to kind of move, provoke you into doing something you don't want to do. So I always used to tell them to kind of look just slightly beyond the opponent, to take in the entire body, focus the gaze beyond it. And that works for BAs as well. You know, so you're in a workshop and you get onto a specific topic, which wasn't where you wanted to go. So you have to think to yourself, is this topic taking me beyond to the objective I need to look at? You know, is it, don't get caught up with the focus on that topic. Think about how it's moving you towards the outcome. And you also need to be aware of everything, the small things. So, you know, if you're facilitating, as you well know, you're listening, questioning, observing, you're writing. So you have to be the one who's looking at everything, keeping your gaze sort of open and taking on board every bit of information you're getting. So if somebody just sits back and crosses their arms, looks a bit annoyed, what's all that about? You know, you have to be able to look beyond the immediately obvious and focus on the middle ground. And also that's useful when dealing with conflict. You know, don't get focused on one person's argument. Think about what's going on in both parties who are arguing or in conflict. So I find that sometimes switching to that kind of mid-focus view is useful, not just metaphorically, but these days physically as well. Sometimes if you've been on Zoom all afternoon, you might just want to look out the window at a distant mountain. Not that we have many of them in Norfolk, but hopefully you get the idea of what I'm saying. And this one's a lovely one, I think, from Munenori. If you get preoccupied with a single leaf, you won't see the tree. You get preoccupied with a single tree, you'll miss the entire forest. And that again is about switching your perspectives. You know, You might want to think like a project manager for a while. You might want to think like a solution designer for a while if you're a BA. You know, you might, if you're not a BA, you might want to put yourself in the mindset of a BA. So changing your focus and your perspective can be quite important. You might then want to switch in a workshop from why are we worrying about this button and where it sits on the screen to how does this work with the benefits case? How does this take us to the outcome we need? So, you know, switching your focus from the leaf to the tree to the forest is worth remembering as a business analyst or anyone really who works in projects. You know, don't get stuck on one focus. This one is one of Musashi's. Don't have any particular fondness for any particular weapon or anything else. Don't get attached to anything, is what he's saying here. You know, we all get attached to things that we think we're good at, or we all worry about things we think we're bad at. And it's best not to get attached to anything. You know, you might have your favorite technique in the world, but if it's not working on this particular project, find another one. And don't imitate anyone, you know. Be yourself, be the BA you want to be, you know. Use your methods that you're comfortable with, but don't be afraid to do things differently. You know, don't be. I've got an apprentice I'm working with at the moment on the apprenticeship scheme. He's now using mood lighting for his Zoom meetings. So when he thinks the meeting's getting a bit stuck or perhaps people are getting a bit agitated, he puts a red light on. When he thinks things are going well, he'll swap it to a green one. That might seem trivial and it might seem a bit silly, but it actually makes quite an impact on the people in the meeting. And, you know, he had to have the courage to do that and the non-attachment to do that. So, you know, sometimes these things can make a difference. Becoming new, this is pretty obvious, but sometimes we forget that, you know, we get so caught up in the moment. You think to yourself, well, I'm just beating my head against a brick wall here. You know, this is quite a good thing for your mental well-being, is to think, actually, I'm just going to take a break. This meeting is stuck. It's not working. We could keep thrashing away at it, or I can say, let's have a coffee break, or even, I feel we're really stuck on this. Should we perhaps come back in a couple of days' time and see if we can make some progress in the meantime? Go away and think about it. Because if everyone's feeling snarled up and they're making very little progress, it's a stressful situation for everybody. So sometimes it's nice just to think of the cherry blossoms, which don't last long, and change your mood and do something different. Start again. I think that's quite an important one. And final bit of samurai wisdom before we move on to a bit more detail. This one is quite esoteric, hearing the sound of wind and water. Munenori said a samurai, the way he attacks should be like the wind and the water. You don't actually notice it until it actually happens. So, you know, wind doesn't make a noise until it hits something. Water doesn't make a noise until it hits something. So, and in my mind, which is obviously you're realizing at the moment is a strange place to live, but in my mind, this is very much like a BA. Often you don't know the BA is there until they sort something out, or they get someone to realize something that they hadn't realized before. You know, a lot of the time we're invisible till either something goes wrong that needs fixing, or the project delivers completely smoothly, and even then we perhaps don't get noticed, which can be frustrating, and also can be the reasons why it's difficult to kind of directly measure the value of what we do. But for me, you know, we are there, we're in the background, we might not be making much noise, but when we do, it certainly makes a difference. So Musashi distilled his writings into these few 7 bullet points. Think without any dishonesty. Touch upon all of the arts. Know the way of all occupations. Well, you can all read them. I'm not going to read them for you. That's a bit patronising. But for me, these actually apply very well to business analysis and being a BA. Think without any dishonesty. Am I really using this method because it's the right thing to do, or is it just because I know how to do it and it doesn't worry me as much as some of the new things? Am I keeping up with this as much as I should do? You know, am I doing enough training? Am I recording things right? You know, think without any dishonesty. It's really quite important. Always be aware of feedback. Take feedback on board. You know, don't fool yourself about anything. Touch upon all of the arts. And I think what the way I look at this one is you need to know about your art, which is requirements development, essentially. So all the methods that you would use, methods, tools, and techniques that you would use. But it also helps if you also understand things like some of the solution design techniques or project management techniques. You know, you might want to throw a bit of UX design into your workshops if you know a little bit about it. It's good to know a bit about all the arts. Know the way of all occupations. You know, if you know what a solution designer does, then you know what they need to get their job done, and you can hopefully provide it to them. Same with project managers. Think what a project manager needs rather than what you're going to give them. And that can be really a breakthrough in relationships if you understand the occupations of the people in the project or program team. Know the advantages and disadvantages of everything. That's probably a big ask. But, you know, what is the advantage of doing a process model as opposed to a user story? What is the advantage of doing a data model as opposed to a process model? It's good to know the advantages and disadvantages of the tools of your trade so that you can pick the right one when you need it. Learn to see everything accurately. That's, again, quite a tricky one, but learn to see. There's a difference between looking and seeing. I think seeing is much more deeper. A lot of the time we look at things and we just get a surface impression of them. Sometimes you need to see things accurately. You know, you need to see the relationships between your project members, your stakeholders. Who's the one who speaks last? Are they the most powerful? Or is it in fact the one that everyone keeps glancing at? The one person in the corner who doesn't say anything is in fact the big power broker in the room. And again, that relates back to paying attention to even small things. You know, when we used to, in those old days, some of us might remember when we used to do meetings in rooms and we actually met people. I would always sit in a specific place at a table. I would always sit in the corner seat because to me that provided a view of all the occupants of the room, and I could keep an eye on how they were feeling, what they were doing. So paying attention to even small things like that can bring dividends. And my favourite one of Musashi's, do nothing useless. I really like that one. I think that's, you know, we all ought to live like that as much as we can throughout our entire lives, I think, not just at work. So that was Musashi's distillation of his philosophy into 7 bullet points. We're going to have now, I believe, a brief pause. Oh, no, we're not. We've got one more slide. And his final distillation was, it is crucial to think of everything as an opportunity to kill. Now, that sounds pretty brutal, but at the end of the day, that was his job. But he would look at everything as an opportunity to win, whether he was stood uphill from somebody, whether he had the sun at his back, whether he could trail his sword in the water so people wouldn't see how long it was. Everything he took as an opportunity to kill. So he was very, very focused in on his art. And I think there's an equivalent for BAs that I will go into in a little while. But for a moment, brief pause for me to get some fluid, and if anyone has any questions.
Thanks, Dave. There isn't any questions yet in the comments. Is there anyone who would like to ask one, and either you can speak it now or put it in the actual comments? Any questions on any of it?
You're probably all thinking, who is this complete nutter? Which is fine. That's the effect I have on people initially.
No, I think it's
no, that's fine.
I think that's as cool. Well, when probably quite a few of us like to reflect on things as well. Yeah, so sure. We're recording it so we can
that's cool.
Get in the chat. One thing actually, sorry, Dave.
That's all right. Yeah, sure.
I was going to say quickly, we are going to extend the prize until tomorrow lunchtime. So if you put hashtag BA Crowd in LinkedIn and then what you felt about today, because I think if you're trying to listen to this, it's probably not great to then go onto LinkedIn. So if we extend it till tomorrow lunchtime, and then we can obviously email the winner and obviously email you the Amazon prize as well. So cool. Thank you.
Cool. So we'll now look at how all this Japanese samurai shenanigans has been translated into something more relevant to business analysis. Hopefully, anyway. That's what I'm keeping my fingers crossed for. This is my maxims that I've come up with, similar to Musashi's. And these are the things that I kind of keep in mind. No, I don't kind of keep in mind. I must eliminate that verbal tick. This is what I keep in mind when I'm working with customers, working with projects. So focus on the outcome. You know, always have an outcome in your mind as to what you're doing. So for every workshop, for every meeting, if it doesn't have an outcome, the chances are it'll wander off into the hinterland of very little value and become just a chat. So I always focus on the outcome, but I also get the group to focus on the outcome. In fact, a lot of the time I get the group to tell me what the outcome should be, because it then becomes much more powerful for them when you bring it back to that outcome, when you bring the team back to the outcome. So focus on the outcome of whatever you're doing. not necessarily the minutiae of doing it. Discard all attachments. I think that's quite that's a really important one. You know, if you've booked a workshop, you've planned it, you've invested loads of time and energy into it, and 10 minutes in, everybody wants to do something completely different, and your world falls apart. That's the moment where you want to think, okay, that's the way it is. What can we do to get to the outcome? And it might even be that you say, right, whilst I sob, you know, uncontrollably about the fact you don't want to do process modeling today, guys, what do you think will get us to the outcome? So discard all attachments, particularly your own opinions. You know, as a BA, you're not worried about what your opinion is. You're worried about what the stakeholders' opinion is. So if you can discard those attachments, it can make life a bit easier. Leave everything in a better state than when you found it. I think that's really important. If you're doing change of any sort, in theory, you want to leave it better than when you found it. You don't want to make it worse. You know, that would be a really bad thing. So I always try and look at a process and think, what way can we improve it, or at least make sure it doesn't get degraded. So always aim to leave everything in a better state than when you found it. And I believe also try and leave everyone in a smarter state than when you found them. And I don't mean go in there with an ear to educating people, but a lot of the time people don't fully understand their own business processes. You know, it's amazing how you go into a new assignment and you ask them what the business problem is, and they're not really sure because they're not 100% sure what the process is. So that's a way you can educate people. Or you could educate people by talking in the middle of a very difficult workshop about Tuckman's team development model. Like when a team forms, then it storms, then it normalizes, then it starts transforming. So form, storm, norm, transform. You know, you can make people realize the way this meeting is going is actually to be expected. And that can be quite a breakthrough moment for people because they may think the whole world's descended into chaos, but it's just the way teams work. And as I said earlier, as a minimum, make nothing worse. You know, where possible, don't make anything worse. And it can happen. You think you can be, but that's, you know, you think you're delivering the best outcome for your immediate sponsor, but that could really upset the apple cart for another team in a different part of the company. So make sure you make nothing worse. Take nothing personally. I have had several workshops where people have got very heated, not necessarily due to me, thankfully. I had one workshop where a senior stakeholder stood up when I said, let's try doing it this way, and said, this is a load of old horse apples, for want of a better expression. And I could have taken that very personally. I could have gone, no, it isn't. And he said, yes, it is. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. And it would all have deteriorated into quite a bit of an argument. Instead, I thought, take nothing personally. And I just said, that's a really interesting opinion. Can you tell me why you feel that way? And that kind of surprised him a bit. I think he was expecting more of a fight. But it turned out that he felt quite aggrieved at the earlier part of the project. He hadn't had a chance to give his opinion. So we had that discussion and he felt a lot better and we moved on. So by not taking it personally, I was able to diffuse the situation. I've already talked about do nothing useless. I think that's really important. So I nicked it. And then also maintaining a beginner's mind, which I'll touch on in a little bit more detail shortly. So that's like my sort of precepts of the middle way, for want of a better word. And they help me cut through lack of confidence, fear of conflict, and crisis situations. And we'll look at these situations now individually. So confidence. I think by adopting these principles, it's made me more confident because I've been able to not take the pressure off myself. There's an old Zen saying that says, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. And it's good to be an expert, but it can be somewhat limiting in terms of the fact that you know a lot about a particular specific niche. And as a BA, I think we've always got to have that beginner's mind. You know, we've got to have endless possibilities rather than certainties, because we're the ones who have to ask the questions about getting to that certainty. We have to be the ones who are comfortable with ambiguity. So that's a saying that's really helped me throughout my career, maintaining that beginner's mind. Perfect outcomes, not perfect outputs. I worked with a lot of graduates over the last few years of my career, and I couldn't understand why they were getting so worried about requirements workshops until one of them said to me, I can't go into the workshop with a context diagram that's not 100% perfect. And it dawned on me that because they'd come from an academic background, they were used to having their work marked. So they believed they had to go into the workshop with a perfect diagram. I was able to explain to them, actually, the truth of the matter is, I always go into workshops with imperfect diagrams. I always go into workshops with process models that are, say, 50% right, 60% right. They might just be an estimate. They might just be a guesstimate. Because what I want to do is to get the stakeholders to participate, to get the stakeholders to develop them. And that way they're more likely to be 100% fit for purpose. So, you know, perfect outcome is what you're looking for, the outcome of the meeting, not a perfect output. An old expression of mine that I reel out time and time again, BAs are not specialists in anything except generalism. You know, we don't have to know a lot about a little, we have to know a little about a lot. And most of the time we have to be very comfortable with ambiguity. That is our specialism, moving from ambiguity to clarity. So, you know, it's best not to get too involved in the detail of a particular product or service or company or organization. But it's a good idea to be well genned up on how you get people to outcomes. The sorts of questions you ask, open or closed questions, all that kind of stuff. That's what we need to be experts in. And it's progress, it's not perfection. Is your meeting getting you towards the outcome you need? Is this conversation getting me towards the outcome I need? Not everything you do is going to be perfect, but if it progresses you in the right direction, then you're in the right space. So that helps me a lot with my confidence. The fact that I don't have to be expert at everything helps me a lot. Conflict management. Well, being in the middle way helps you with conflict management. This is the wrong way to handle it. You against somebody else, my way or the highway. Batter, 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 smash, smash, arg. It all becomes very conflicted. The best way, in my way, experience of doing things is to bring people to focus on the outcome. Okay, we might not be agreeing on this, but how is the best way we can get to where we need to go? That pre-agreed outcome we had at the start of this meeting. I don't want to argue with you. Let's see if we can actually get to the outcome. What can we do as a team using the inclusive language, we, what can we do as a team to make this succeed? So inclusive, positive language and pointing at the outcome, not at each other. That for me works very well. And it's the same principle of conflict between other people in a workshop. The wrong way to handle it as a BA, or anyone really, is to stick yourself in the line of fire, because then you're getting shot at from both directions. You probably annoyed both parties because you're trying to save them. Actually, what you really want to be doing, again, is saying, let's not argue together. Let's look at how we can get to that outcome. I can see you've got this opinion on that piece and you've got a differing opinion. So how far do we have to step back from those opinions before we can focus on the outcome again? I think we can both agree that we want this project to succeed, can't we? And if one of them says no, then you know who the troublemaker is. So if we're in agreement with that, how are we going to do it? How are we going to get to the outcome? Again, focusing them away from personal conflict and the energy back onto the outcome has always been a very effective technique for me. Crisis management. It's fair to say I've had the odd crisis on the projects I've been working on. You know, you go live and it doesn't work. Slight problem. It's important, I think, to keep your head in times of crisis. You know, I've seen people call meetings because they think the first thing you need to do in an emergency is have a meeting. That might not actually be the case. Then they forget to minute the meeting, or they haven't invited anyone who's actually responsible for fixing the problem. You know, first thing sometimes you've got to do is switch the thing off that's gone wrong, because if you're talking about a new business quotation system and it's sending out wrong quotes, switch the damn thing off first before you worry about how to fix it. So you've got to keep a clear head. So for me, these are a few hints and tips about doing that using sort of my middle way thinking method. So identify the crisis, and it might not be the crisis you actually think it is. It might be a completely different one in disguise. Again, put down any emotional attachment you have and try and get other people to become emotionally detached as well. People love a crisis in an ironic way because it gives them something to get attached to. It's like Piers Morgan on Good Morning Britain. You know, he loves stoking things up. He loves getting emotionally attached to it. So, put down that emotional attachment might allow you to see things a bit differently. And also remember, facts are your friend, opinions are your potential enemy. An opinion is not a fact. A lot of people think it is these days, but it isn't unless it's backed up with some very solid data. So it's good to remember that. And that kind of ties back in with Musashi's theory of discarding all attachments. Then you've got eliminate actions without purpose. Let's have a meeting. Why? Well, because we got an emergency. Yes, and how is this meeting going to help that emergency? Well, I don't know, but we ought to have a meeting about it. These are the questions as BAs you have to get used to asking. What is this meeting going to add to what we're doing? Do we really need it? Do we really need to do this thing? If it hasn't got purpose, we don't need to do it. So do nothing useless. There's nothing worse than a meeting that doesn't achieve it. Well, there's a lot of things worse than a meeting that doesn't achieve anything, but it's somewhat irksome anyway. The other thing is think. A lot of people in panic or crisis situations don't actually think, they react reflexively. They tend to come up with solutions that fit their worldview. So it might well be, this is bound to be X system's fault because it always has been in the past. Well, yeah, but that might not be the case this time. Don't enter, and people always say we've got to switch this off, or we've got to retweak the emitter array through the transporter system, like they'll say on Star Trek or something, and you think, well, this sounds like a solution. It's not exactly identifying what the problem is. We need to make sure we got the right problem before we start throwing solutions at it. So again, keeping calm, keeping in that middle way and not getting attached to anything. And also don't obsess on the problem. Identify the desired outcome and move towards it. Once you've identified the problem, I found a lot of people just like rehashing it. So you go to the meeting and everyone will talk the same thing every meeting. Of course, if we had shut that server unit off first time, and yeah, we know that. We're kind of beyond that now. How are we going to get to the outcome we need? So again, it's about keeping calm, staying in the middle, and maintaining that beginner's mind in terms of how you're going to get the project back on its feet. And leadership, middle way leadership. So you've got colleagues in conflict. The IT people are saying we need our info like this or we can't do anything. The business people are saying, well, this format you've got is completely pointless. And as a BA, you tend to find yourself in the middle of these conversations. So ask a middle type question. Why should our colleagues, or address it to your IT folk, why should our colleagues in the business want to put effort into doing it this way? So it's an open question. It's better than saying, should we do it this way? Because the IT guys will say yes, and the business people say no. So ask that open question, and then the details start to come out. Well, because all other projects are doing it, this format ensures we don't miss any vital information. We only need to do it once. That's a lot better conversation than we ought to do it this way. No, we don't. Yes, we do. No, we don't. Yes, we do. And it may provoke that reaction of, oh, I see. Okay, let's talk about it. So again, maintaining that middle way sort of thought process of not being attached to anything, keeping yourself focused on the outcome, can help other people get to it as well. And then there's the middle way strategy. I think does a lot for your well-being and does a lot for your general stress levels. Because when you're in stress, your thought processes become tactical. It's like, there's a tiger, how do I get out of the room? There's a door, run. That is a tactical thought process. It narrows down your focus. You become obsessed with the thing that's causing the stress. You don't look wider. You focus on activity. We've got to do something. We've got to have that meeting. Why? Everything is short term. We've got to do this now because it's the only thing we've got to do, and it's the most important thing in the world ever. So everything becomes short term. And you also find people that have much poorer communication in times of crisis and stress. And you need to think very carefully about that. And it can be a time when information can overwhelm you, or you allow information to overwhelm you because you're focusing, you're narrowing down your focus, a bit like having a panic attack in a sense. And it also excludes people. We've got to do this now. I actually had one project manager say to me once in my career, we haven't got time to do the requirements. We've just got to get this project delivered. You can imagine my response to that one after I'd sort of face palmed myself a couple of times. Those are very, very exclusive actions. They're excluding thought processes because they're very narrowing and tactical. So if you can remain calm, your thinking tends to be more strategic. How do we get to the outcome we all want? It will allow you to widen your gaze to the distant mountain. You can focus on the outcome. It will probably be much longer term in terms of the time spans that you're talking about getting to a result, and it will last longer as well. Being calm lasts longer than being stressed, because you can't keep stressed for very long without really having a complete meltdown. Keeping calm allows you to communicate better, and also don't get engrossed in too much information. Don't let it overwhelm you. Just underwhelm yourself with information. Shut down areas where you don't need the information. Don't bother looking at your emails. If you're concentrating on this crisis, give yourself time to be calm. Shut off your emails, put your phone on voicemail, and just give yourself a moment to be calm in the otherwise chaotic world. And include people. You know, let's talk about this. How can we do this? How can we move this forward successfully? Inclusive, positive language is really important. So Musashi had his middle way strategy. It is crucial to think of everything as an opportunity to kill. He was a bushi, he was a warrior. As a business analyst, and is it a coincidence there's BU at the start of each word? I think it probably is, to be fair, but it's worth thinking about. But my business analysis strategy, it is crucial to think of everything as an opportunity to make a difference. I think that's what we do as BAs, and I think that's what I try and strive to do in general throughout my career. So that's it. That's my view on the middle way strategy of business analysis. We can now move to any questions that people may have.
So I found that bit really interesting where you said BAs aren't specialists, because I've worked with a company that I work for now so long, for BGL, and I kind of think I am a specialist. So recently I've been working with APIs, and it's kind of unsettled me because I don't know much about APIs. So where I'd write a story and be able to put a lot of detail, I've not been able to do that. So it's kind of been quite hard for me to actually, and I've been working with the team. So the team have then gone on and written it, and then I've kind of overseen it, and that's fine. But it made me feel really awful, the fact that I couldn't write the story on it because I'm not technical on APIs.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point. I mean, you know, in my career at Aviva, when I first joined back in 1824 or whenever it was, when I got off the cart outside the office, you know, with the horse-drawn cart, I got put into the pensions admin area. And I was in there for 5-6 years until they threw me out, essentially, because I kept asking really irritating questions like, why do we do this thing twice? And why do we send out 4 covering letters? And in the end, they threw me out to IT and said, get out of here, heretic, you asked too many awkward questions. But as a result of that 5 years of pensions admin experience, I tended to get put on pensions projects. So, you know, pensions products, that sort of thing. So I guess I do have a specialism in a degree, but it's never been right down to the micro level for me. I've always kept it, you know, at a level where, because I think in a way, if you have too much information in your head, you sometimes, it's like Homer Simpson said, last week I learned German and I forgot how to drive. You know, you bring some information in and you forget some other stuff. So I think we are specialists to a degree. We're specialists in projects and we're specialists in business analysts, being business analysts. But I don't think you have to be a particular expert on a topic to get an outcome from a meeting, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Steve Ramsey, I've got your comment. Would you like to ask that one, please?
Yeah, can do. That's really fascinating, David. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Steve.
It all seems to make sense, and what you would do in kind of an ideal world, but very easily, because we're all humans, get blown off course. And my question is about what are the most common kind of traps or things that people kind of move away from, as in where would you place your most focus on following this middle way? Is it the beginner mindset? Is it the staying calm? What are the things that are most easy to go wrong?
I think for me, it's focusing on an outcome. You know, it's having that outcome in mind. And I think if you've got an outcome in your head, it kind of gives you that compass to steer to, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
And it's even more powerful if you're working with a group, if you get the group to agree the outcome. Because if you're working with a group of people and you give them the outcome, there's always that chance that they don't secretly don't agree with it, so they'll work against it, perhaps unconsciously. But if you've got them to agree the outcome, when somebody is taking them away from that, because you're right, the real world does intrude in my little fantasy world sometimes, and we all have meetings where there's perhaps not a troublemaker, but there's someone who has an opinion that differs greatly from everyone else and is kind of taking the meeting off course. Instead of you taking them on and saying, well, we need to move towards my outcome, you say, well, the group agreed where we wanted to go. This doesn't feel like it's sort of getting us that way. What can we do about it? That's a very powerful technique. So I think for me, it took a number of years before I realised that as a facilitator, I have a lot of power in the room, but I also have very little power in a sense, because I'm just steering them. And I think, I had a boss actually, if he went to a meeting and he didn't know what the outcome was in 5 minutes, or if no one had told him, he'd get up and leave, because he said there's no point staying because we're not going to get anywhere because no one knows where we're going. So for me, having that outcome in mind led to everything else. The fact that I didn't have to be a specialist in anything, I could keep calm if I could keep myself focused on the outcome.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thanks. Yeah, that's really helpful.
Cheers.
Cool. Thank you. I've got a question in here from Gertie, and I'm gonna read this one out because probably, Steve, that's what you wanted, and I made you talk. So sorry.
That's nice.
Don't worry, I don't take anything personally.
But I know Steve wouldn't mind, so it's fine. So this one from Gertie is: any tips on how we get started on the middle way as a business analyst, or how to get started?
I think, like I said, that kind of moment of insight has come. There's been a number of moments of insight when I realised that people were focused very much on getting everything right, and I used to be a perfectionist. I'd want to go in there and think that this process model is brilliant, and everyone's going to go, Dave, you're a genius. You fully understand our business problem. Therefore, we don't have to do anything. That at the time, that seemed the right thing for me. But then I realised that by doing that, I took away all the discussion. I took away their intellectual journey through the problem, and that led to them owning the problem rather than it being a problem that I owned for them. So I think that kind of intellectual realization of I had the power, but I needed to give the power back. Sounds like a song. I can't remember who that was. Fight the power. Never mind. That was a big revelation for me, and that need not. I don't have to be perfect to do the job. You can throw something in front of people that is in fact deliberately imperfect, and let them play with it, and you'll get a really positive outcome from it. You don't have to put all that perfection into everything. So I think they were two moments of insight, and just that kind of not taking it personally, because most people come to work in order to do a good job. Most people are not inherently evil in work. They don't want to sit there on a project that's not working. We've all met the odd person who perhaps doesn't fit into that and does perhaps get their kicks out of being disruptive. But I think if you work on the basis that no one is inherently evil, so therefore don't take it personally, and keep using that positive, inclusive language, how can we move towards success? Not how can I help you or how can I save you, but how can we get this to work? What can we do to make this better? And I found that gets a really big difference out of people when you use that type of language.
Yeah,
and use the silence as well. Using the silence is a very good technique. Not for an hour. That would be a bit awkward on Zoom, I think, using the silence for an entire hour.
Cool, thank you. Is there any other questions from anybody?
There's a couple of comments in the chat just about how interesting everybody's found it, David. For me, that is one of the big takeaways about the outcome as well. When people ask me what I do, I quite often describe myself as a middleman or a middle person. Yeah. So I think now I'm going to try and shift to the middle way and use that inclusive language of steering everybody towards that outcome. That's really good to me.
I'm glad people found it interesting. I mean, one sort of final point I found throughout my career is we always tend to, and particularly being involved in conference organisation, you always assume, or people always assume, that you can only learn about your job from things that are directly relevant to your job. And, we've had people at BA conferences. I mean, we had Sir Clive Woodward a few years ago talking about the rugby coaching. And a lot of people go, well, this isn't anything to do with business analysis. No, it isn't, but you can learn a heck of a lot from any particular interest that you have, and bring it into your job, bring it into your career. You know, it's amazing if you open your mind, what insights you can get from your own interests and your own hobbies, which are important to you, and therefore make your job better if you can import them into it in some way.